I'd like to introduce to everybody one of the reasons for us doing this webinar series, Geronimo Bejarano from Florida. Geronimo,
Hey, how
welcome.
are you guys? How are you guys? Good to be here. Be exciting.
Tell us, Geronimo, what's your biggest take home from the series so far?
I think the main one has really been that we're trying to be Alfreds and not Batmans, and we're trying to guide by the side instead of tell people how what we think is the best way might not be the best way for them, and let them self-organize.
What does that mean, self-organize?
Let them just kind of figure out the best way for themselves, and we're promoting physical activity more than we are promoting a specific way to do things.
Out of the mouths of babes. So this comes from one of our students and our other student that's with us that's learning as we go here. One of the great learn-it-alls and future leaders of the chiropractic fold, Aaron Kubal from Minnesota. Share with us a little bit about any transformative concepts or ideas that you've gleaned from these last 10 weeks.
Sure. Yeah. Good morning, everybody. I think for me, it's just been amazing to see kind of looking at this from a principled approach, like Craig and Ryan, the guests, talk about so often. It's amazing to observe how connected a lot of the ideas are that each guest has talked about. So when you consider like the patient-centeredness of Matt Lowe and Peter Stillwell's message, or the way we create a culture with Rachel Balkovec, there's just, I think Craig said it best in Rachel's webinar, with the principled approach, you can enter anywhere and find your way to another concept. It's also intimately intertwined, which has been a really fun thing to see.
So I love that mindset from two students, from Geronimo and from Ryan, about the needs for us to guide by the side, like Alfred, as Geronimo said, and to help create an environment, whether we're a coach or a clinician, where people can self-organize and what we call auto-regulate based on the environment that we set up to gain access to the skills that they need to be able to achieve their goals. And I know when Matt Lowe was here, he talked a lot about identifying what people's demands are and where they're coming from. And this idea of empathy is the beginning point of our culture. Our culture begins and ends with the person that we serve. It's all about that motivational interviewing and identification of what the demands are, not just of the pro, but the average Joe. These are principles. And so for us, it's crucial to identify what people's fears, worries, goals, and concerns are, and then to come up with a program that serves them. We are in a service field. We're in a service industry. And for a lot of us, this has been a time of reflection where we're not necessarily in our comfort zone. We're out of our comfort zone. We're having to stretch ourselves because our environment is different. And when we take a step back, and the pandemic has created that pause button for us, we can see how many of the things that we were doing before, we were on autopilot. So we had gotten into these routines and into this comfort zone where we weren't necessarily challenging ourselves and growing, and yet our systems are broken. We have a disability crisis. We have an inactivity crisis. If we look only at the facts are that since 1990, disability has gone up 54%. The facts are we have more imaging today. We have more people being labeled with the nocebo, that they are damaged. And so what happens is people become overprotective, and then they become underprepared. So basically the system is rigged to make people fragile. Yet the body is designed to last. It's not designed to break. And so we are the stewards. We are the ones responsible for sharing these messages of science and bridging the gap from science to practice. And in this regard, and I want to throw it back to you, Geronimo, I feel, and you're a student, so you have the perfect vantage point. You have objectivity. You don't have a vested interest. I feel that we kind of developed blinders and developed a cognitive dissonance whereby we were continuing to do things as we had done them before, the status quo bias, and unable to take a step back and see, as we can see now from a parachute view, that, hey, this system is broken. 54% increase in disability, over imaging, over diagnosis, over labeling, over treatment. And yet people are more resilient than we give them credit for. We've been managing people away from load. We've been creating a fragilista mindset. So Geronimo, again, out of the mouths of babes, tell us from your perspective, objectively, as a young person who's not even licensed yet, how did we get here?
I feel like a lot of people are trying to find an answer, and for something that might not really have an answer, or at least as of right now does not have an answer, and trying to find certainty and those times has led us to a lot of bad decisions and a lot of bad ideas.
So excessive certainty, this sort of know-it-all mindset, the opposite of what Lao Tzu would teach, that the ocean is greater than all the rivers because it lies beneath them, so they all flow into it. And I think a guiding light for this webinar series, and I'm glad you talk about uncertainty, is acceptance of uncertainty, the humility. That's the fountain from which the learn it all mindset springs. And in an era where we have this COVID crisis, we see that our elderly are victims of this, but also the people who are obese, people who are in a pro-inflammatory state, who are less active, they're also suffering greatly. And this is also what affects our health span, because so many people, we live longer today, but we're not necessarily living better. It's not only a low back pain disability crisis. We have a crisis with non-communicable diseases where cancer is on the rise, where we're living longer, but we're not living better. And a lot of this goes back to SNAPs, the smoking, nutrition, alcohol, physical activity, social participation, sleep, and stress factors, which to a great extent can be influenced by healthcare professionals. Yes, they're socially determined, but coaches and clinicians sit in an ideal position where we can influence people's behavior by the words that we use, by our language. And when we image people, when we scan people and we tell them we found the problem, and we don't tell them there are false positives, instead of reassuring them, we're actually making them feel damaged. And so naturally they become overprotective. They amplify their pain. They become hypervigilant to their pain. They become sensitized. And now they want to avoid activities because they believe every hurt equals harm. And so they become both overprotective and underprepared. And so it all comes back to us seeing the science. We have a disability crisis. We overdetect trivial false positives. And as a result, the cat is out of the bag. Instead of us being comfortable with the uncertainty and communicating that better. And so, Aaron, what do you think, again, as a student, and most of us were established coaches and clinicians. As a student, Aaron, what are you seeing amongst your peers that should give all of us hope?
I do think there is, and it's evident just kind of tracking people following along with the webinars, there is a strong desire to find some sort of progress, whether that's through an evidence-based approach or really buying into a patient-centered approach. I think there is a big calling kind of going on right now and a shift that's happening. I think it's a shift that's been going on for 20 years, but as you know as well as anybody, change is a slow process and it takes a lot of effort from a lot of different people. So it's just like anything else. We're not buying into a quick fix with the way that we, transform the field. It's a process and it takes a whole community, as Lorimer always says. And I think that is happening. It's just, it takes small pockets of individuals for sure.
So that echoes things that I've learned from Ryan Chow about the importance of us all working together. The vested interests are very powerful in our fields. The vested interests are a ball and chain. Profits aren't necessarily in alignment with the best interests of those that we serve. And so traditions are difficult until you have a moment like this to break. And so the unanticipated benefit of a pandemic is that we're being compelled to guide by the side and empower people and show people what they can do for themselves. We're being compelled to teach people that the SNAPs, the smoking, nutrition, alcohol, physical activity, stress and sleep and social participation, these things are all amenable to change. And of course, we're realizing fully, it's not a moral judgment. A lot of people have social determinants that make it next to impossible for them to handle their smoking addiction or their alcoholism or their sedentarism. So it's not a question of us just saying, logically speaking, if you change your behavior, you'll be less likely to have back pain or to develop cancer or heart disease or hypertension or become obese. It's not a question of us passing judgment on people, but when we create the environment, when we create a community that's supportive, then together we can better upskill the helpful factors, the behavioral nudges. And with the COVID crisis now, people maybe are sleeping better. People maybe aren't commuting like they were. People have the time to think about changes that maybe they should have made before. And we're here to support people. And the irony, as Rachel Locke said, is that people are surprised by how empathetic and caring the telehealth experience is. So Ryan, you're really a champion for building community. When Aaron says that we're learning that we're all in this together and we're all meeting, and you're meeting with your team on Zoom and you're doing group exercise training much more than one-on-one now, how do you see us leveraging community as we go back into our previous lifestyles?
I think from the standpoint of this community and coaches, clinicians, chiropractors, PTs, I think all of us are embracing these things. As we have Nick in here, something as serendipitous as this thing, it's obviously it's not something he's looking for it to happen, but then now everyone's focused on language because this is all virtual. I think the social aspect and the community aspect here is us coming together, sharing ideas, problem solving together, asking each other. I've had a lot of clinicians and coaches that I've just had, like you said, have time to now say, hey, this is what we're testing. Hey, this is what we're doing. And as we get back to in person and things like that, I think people now have embraced, like you said, since we've been doing more groups, people who previously were not convinced that they could get the same experience are finding they got a better experience in groups. They're enjoying the competition of being in a group. They're enjoying the togetherness or the familiarity of seeing people they work out alongside or hear people progressing or things like that. I think are valued aspects of community. And I think all the coaches and clinicians, I think have always, a lot of people, they miss learning and sharing together. So I've had a lot of coaches and clinicians. We used to take courses together. We traveled to Perform Better to see you or Nick. We couldn't, we can't get together for that. But then now people are saying, hey, well, what kind of Zoom classes are you taking? What books are you reading? Things like that. So I think it's just pulled us all together. I think it's opened our eyes to avenues that we wouldn't have tried, and hopefully people continue to stay working together and collaborating instead of being divided and protecting our mutual interests or separate interests, since I think we all realize we're all in this together more than ever.
I love that. So the community is not just of the people that we're serving, but it's also of us. And this community of like-minded people who really have a higher mission to help stem the tide of this disability crisis. I think Stephen Hawking said before he died in a short, less than 60-second video recorded in the library, I think it was at Cambridge, said the cause of most disease is we eat too much and we move too little. And why it is more people don't realize this is beyond my comprehension. And that's really a clarion call for us, that we need to build the systems, we need to establish the culture for community amongst not only our clients, but also ourselves. And Ryan, you've really taught me a lot about this. And I think now, as we try to broaden out beyond just the high income people we serve in West Los Angeles or Lower Manhattan, to create a lower tier of service, so that this is not only for the high income people, but this is for the low income people. If we can leverage technology in order to offer a higher quality service like group training, or like an exercise library, like we created a COVID-19 exercise library. We vetted it from all of our FPM community. We've placed it on our First Principles of Movement website and YouTube channel, and it's free. We can offer things of very, very low cost that can go out to South America, to Central Europe, to Africa. We're no longer hostage of just taking care of people one-on-one. This is the incredible gift of this mindset and this opportunity, all because of the pandemic. So were it not for the pandemic, I'm not sure that necessarily we would have gotten from where we were to where we are as quickly. So I want to welcome Nick from Irish Rugby, and we are talking about communication and culture. And I remember Nick very, very well. Mark Verstegen came to Santa Monica once, and Nick, he gave a talk. Sue introduced him, and he gave a brief talk about culture. And oh my gosh, the core principles of athletes' performance / Exos that Mark reflects, personifies, and educates us all about, this idea of these pillars of mindset and fuel, movement and recovery. And he says we'll always be about movement, but recovery may be the limiting factor. But really, I think more than that, when I listen to Mark speak and talk about the culture and the commitment to core principles, what I can never shake is this idea that it's about upgrading. It's always about upgrading. Can you share with us just a bit about how he was able to communicate so effectively across his whole brand, and it went beyond just Exos. It's really gone to coaches, but it's gone beyond coaches. It's gone to clinicians. It's gone to this whole musculoskeletal space. Mark is one of the true visionaries. Where is that fountain? Where is the origin of that cultural integrity that he's able to express so clearly, Nick?
It's well, first and foremost, Craig and team and everyone listening, thank you so much again for bringing me back on. It's a true honor, and I enjoyed the last call tremendously. So I'm start with a thank you there. If you chronicle Mark Verstegen, you got to go back to the beginning. And I think his roots from an upbringing perspective, I've never had the liberty of meeting his mom and dad, but the way he speaks about his mom and his dad and his siblings, he was brought up on principles, you know, and I think there are many principles that you could bring yourself and your family up on, but the fact is they had principles and they lived by them. They didn't just talk about them. And that was very apparent when Mark talks about his mom and his dad and his siblings. And he oftentimes jokes that he's the least successful of the bunch when he looks at his siblings. And again, so very much so in their respective domains, the Verstegens continue to have success. But, you know, Mark goes into play college football in Washington, and he gets hurt early on in his career. But for him, he saw it as an opportunity. And from that opportunity, he started coaching and supporting their head of strength conditioning, who went on to be the head of strength conditioning for BYU. And that's kind of where his journey began. And inevitably, he went to Georgia, and then he went to the Voluntary Institute in Florida and Bradenton and started IPI, the International Performance Institute. And as I joined the call, Craig, it almost feels like that initial crucible where everything kind of came together. And if you would, the methodology that we all now know as the Exos training system was formed, he'll be the first to tell you he might have been the spark. He might have been the catalyst, but a spark is nothing without something to burn, without individuals to bounce ideas off, and without individuals to add to that fire, to turn it into a flame, to turn it into what it's become today. And so the likes of the Jeff Sassones, the Craig Friedmans, the Brandon Marcellos, the Darrell Letos, the Luke Richesons, they all had their own sparks that were brought in together. And he's lived his life with such humility. He said, let me find the best minds across therapy, across strength conditioning, across massage and manual therapy, across nutrition and sports psych. And for him, holistically, that's how he viewed the body. So it made sense to not isolate or cocoon his conversations to just his domain. And so ultimately, in bringing all those individuals together, the methodology was very much so born at IPI and nurtured in the late 90s in what we all know as athletes' performance. But the biggest thing that he does is he sets a vision. He most certainly sets a mission, but he gets out of people's way. He never had to be the person ultimately in control. The way that he led is to put you in a position to lead yourself and create the shared accountability for you to do that. And if you are not leading yourself to the highest level that he believes you can, will he let you know? And most certainly he will. But he'll do it in a manner that is equally empathetic as it is hard or straight to the point. You never feel that he's coming at you just to come at you. It's always a lesson to be learned. And no matter how many years I worked with him and for him, and no matter the conversation, I always felt that there was something that could be learned. And I feel that everybody at Exos felt that way. That even if you were a new employee, you know, in many cultures, if you're the new person on the block, you have to earn your stripes. But it's almost like when you got hired at Exos, if you had passed, at least this was very true early on when I was there, if you had gone through the hurdles, because you were interviewed by everyone, Craig. That's what a lot of people don't know. You know, back when I was there in 2009, 2010, those middle years, if someone wanted to get a job in Phoenix, they literally were interviewed by about 8 people. Not dissimilar to how Google does it with their micro interviews. So you weren't just having to convince some person at the top. You were convincing the people that might work for you as well as the people that might work next to you. And I think what you're seeing with all of this are his core principles behind the mindset, nutrition, movement, recovery. And that is one of humility. You know, we would talk about checking ego at the door, but you had to live it. And I'll never forget, I couldn't have been there more than a year. And he says this in a meeting, and it's the most serious I have ever heard him state a point to this day. And he said, there is one major way to lose your job at Athletes Performance. And he kind of gave the dramatic pause. And he's like, that's you taking credit for your athlete's success. If you think for 1 second you are the number one variable, you are kidding yourself. They've got to come in here every day, spend their money to get better, to push themselves, to achieve something where the odds are stacked against them having success. And here we're talking about professional sport. And so humility and an athlete-centric mindset, if you would, that was the supercharger within his overall value system. And ultimately, we talked about mindset, nutrition, movement, recovery, but I think how we brought those to life was in a very egoless culture. And out of an egoless culture, you see born challenge, you see curiosity, you see a willingness to be wrong, an eagerness to be wrong, to push to the fringe of your comfort zone, to be comfortable challenging up, lateral, and down. And out of that reaps the growth that so many people have observed with Exos and the people that work there. Because let's say something, Craig, it is very uncommon to see people go from the private sector into professional sport. Now, granted, as these high performance facilities, which Mark really was the pioneer in, have come about, especially in baseball now, you're seeing a lot of people go from private facility into pro. But when I was there, 2006 started out, that wasn't very common. It was unheard of. If anything, we were still trying to prove ourselves to the professional sports, that we were a partner of theirs, right? We were not a competitor. And so ultimately, the biggest sign of success is what the people you lead go on to do. And if you look at the amount of people that have since gone on to professional sport, baseball, NBA, NFL, in my case, leaving internationally, German national team with Shad Forsyth and others, it is remarkable. And so it's the bravery to have strong principles embedded in an egoless culture that looks to not take credit for others' success, but to be a servant, and a servant first and foremost. And out of that, so much growth can occur. And that's what he did better than anyone, is put it together, and get out of people's way to let them grow.
I love that. Nick, that is a testament. And I've experienced it. Back in 2000, my first trip to University of Arizona, where athletes' performance was embedded. I was Mark's guest and invited by him and Ken Crenshaw from the Diamondbacks to teach a course to AP staff and various coaches and clinicians in Major League Baseball. And that began a 20-year relationship. I go back each year, and I've been blessed to be able to invite people like this past year, Rachel Balkovec, and introduce her to a wider audience. And of course, the circle always closes because Rachel had been an intern there in the past. So that's a fascinating insight that you share with us. And I can really feel all the principles we've been talking about what a scientist is, and robustly testing your theories, seeking failure so you don't waste your time, and the humility, not taking credit for athletes' success, making things person-centered, not doctor-centered or pathology-centered. And of course, ultimately, one of the big take-homes for us is this guiding by the side. And you had it embedded all along there. I think in the clinical world, and I think a lot of trainers, they get lost thinking that they're correcting things rather than realizing that we're here to create an environment to challenge people and to let people own their successes. We don't want people to think we're Batman. We don't want people to think like we fixed them or we came up with the latest exercise. We want to create an environment where they're doing things that make sense to them, where it's relatable. And then the victories are there so that they have that conviction and confidence, that self-efficacy, which will rid them of feeling fragile. And in elite sports, any whiff, any scent of fragility is the death knell of a career. But the same in pain. Acute pain patients who become fragile, and we've actually gamified fragility really effectively. Acute pain patients who become fragile, even if they were not prone to chronicity intrinsically, we are actually the nocebo. We are the ones that are co-conspiring to bring about chronicity. And those who are already chronic, need all of our greatest compassion to be able to help them to feel that they are capable of reintegrating into social activities that they deem of value. So this crisis has helped our environments in our gyms and in our clinics, and of course, in nature. Hopefully, we'll learn from this. Hopefully, systems that were broken before, we know that a lot of things are going to go back to the way they were. But hopefully, this unprecedented event, this black swan event, will change us forever too, and will be something that we will not forget. I fear that we'll forget this when we go back, and in 6 months or a year or two, we'll be back to things as they were. I pray that that doesn't happen because we're seeing all these positive changes. The wrap is coming off of the outdoor gyms, right, Ryan?
Yeah, they can't stop everybody. They're just going, and they're going to use them anyway.
So my handles are here. You guys can contact me, and we have lots of resources for you. But just the facts. We have a crisis. We have a disability crisis. And 54% increase in disability since 1990. That's just unacceptable. We're spending more and getting less. And why is it? Well, we can correlate this with the inactivity crisis, which is something Professor Yonda warned us about in the 60s, really. But we know that the time people are spending in chairs and the amount of activity people are getting is getting less and less. Grip strength is down since 2000. And then we go ahead and we label people. We communicate with our words, with our language. The funny story, Nick, sad story really, but the clinicians in the room will all recognize this. In the first 5 minutes with a patient, the first thing patients tell us is what they were told. They are dying to tell us what they were told. Well, I was told that I have a deteriorating spine. I'm bone on bone. I don't have any room in my spinal canal. My nerve is being squeezed. They're just dying to tell us this stuff. The richness, the variability of the language and expressions that people use that can only lead to one thing, can only lead to a fragilista mindset. It's off the charts. This is the status quo. And it is shocking. And we hear from Aaron and Geronimo. Geronimo, you have to chime in here. Doesn't it just appall you what you see in the trenches, what you see in the professions that you're about to enter?
Yeah, it's troubling. And it comes from both clinicians and MDs and coaches, and just the way that society has kind of built these things up is troubling on what the future is looking like, especially when you start reading some of the papers from like the 80s and 90s, and it's not like any of these ideas are new, is what starts to get a little troubling.
Don't you have hope for the future though, Aaron? Don't you see this black swan as bringing about a new perspective, giving us a vision that might catalyze change in a way that no amount of dissemination of evidence-based guidelines has succeeded in doing?
What causes me to hold out hope is the fact that although some of these unhelpful messages continue to be perpetuated by clinicians, they're still well-meaning clinicians. It's not like it's people who have an agenda and they're trying to make the world feel broken. I think a lot of it is just not realizing how damaging words can be, which is why it's so great that we have Nick in here, of course. But I think if we can just continue to chip away and try to show people a better way by setting that example, I think we can get that change. Because again, it's people want to do better, but you have to know better to do better, of course. So I hold out hope in that sense.
I love that. You have to know better to do better. But we've been disseminating this evidence for 30 years. The ability to bridge the gap from science to the trenches is almost nil. It's just mavens and outliers that have been pivoting how they practice. That's why I love, Nick, what you're talking about how Mark set a vision and then got out of the way. Maybe we're getting out of our own way because of the pandemic. I don't know. I mean, telehealth during COVID, combined with decreased access to elective procedures, elective orthopedic procedures, such as injections, surgeries, scans, passive physical therapy, is causing a behavior shift from low value care or debunked treatments even. So not just low value, but non-value, to high value behavior change, such as increased physical activity. So as Ari Emanuel said, don't let a crisis go to waste. And I know, Nick, you're a student of the brainstem, and crisis affects us in a different way, doesn't it? It affects us in a different psychological or emotional or visceral way. I've heard you talk at Perform Better about what happens under crisis. Right now, we're constrained. And I think it was a shock to people, but I think there's some adjustments and adaptations because that's what happens. And can't we use that with our athletes and our clients and our patients? Can't we help them reconceptualize by just changing the rules of the games a little bit when we do go back?
Yeah, it's there's a lot in there, and actually your last slide on the mislabeled beliefs mapped to the slide you have here just sparked an idea. So when I was writing the language of coaching, I use the word constrain. You constrain what you read, because when you're in the writing mode, if you're reading too much of other people's work, you gotta strike the balance between the two. And so today I've been searching around my library trying to find the next book that can get me curious again and start to let's say tickle the mind and turn me back from writer to learner, even though you learn a lot while you're writing, and you know that, Craig, as well as anybody. And so the book's called Cure by Joe Marchant. And now I'm literally just a chapter in, so I don't hold me to this as my final review. But funny enough, the first chapter is on placebo. And basically the book is trying to look at Western versus, let's say, Eastern medicine, and making sure that we don't throw the baby out with the bathwater, and understanding the mind's role in physical healing, which is exactly what we're talking about with mislabeled beliefs and the impact of one's psychological state around their physical state. And we know they're intertwined, but sometimes we're still acting as Descartes suggested, that the mind and body are separate, but we know very much so that's not the case. However, sometimes our behavior will deceive us. And so she says something remarkably interesting at the end as she goes through a number of studies, and that is placebo works to the degree that what you think the placebo, or the thing the placebo is suggesting to you, is within your own biology's ability to produce. So for example, a lot of the medications for Parkinson's or possibly depression and anxiety seem to be more subject, when you look at controlled trials, to placebo than others, because they operate on pathways within the brain that we can produce ourselves, in the case of, let's say, dopamine, for example. And so what's interesting about that is when we have someone come in who does not present with the physical ailments suggestive of the level of pain they're in. So we're in chronic pain, but we as clinicians and even your diagnostic tests cannot explain why they're in pain. Now, this is just speculation. I'm not an expert in this, so let me put the double asterisk around my following statement. But I believe the more what we're trying to change exists within the person, the more important how we communicate and how we establish psychological norms becomes. There's no level of cueing that can suddenly repair a torn tissue. Let me be very clear. But if they have the physical assets and they've fully healed themselves, but yet they are still in pain, the more the psychological state of the person and obviously the hormonal impacts those psychological states have are brought to the forefront. And ultimately, I found that to be the most interesting part of the chapter. That studies where placebo effects are the highest are ones where a medication is acting on a process that is innate to the human system. And so it's just the belief that that system has been instigated. It's the belief that that hormone has been released. It's the belief that increase in dopamine has been brought to my system that's enough to start to increase the system's adaptation and acting as if. And so it just reinforces why on your last slide, this is so important. Now to your crisis piece here, if all of a sudden the only solution I have is to step away from the shot and get into the exercise, if that becomes the only option, then psychologically it becomes more valuable to me because I don't have an alternative. And so I'm not saying that the reduction in ability to get elective health and other pieces isn't part of it. It most certainly is. But in constraining behavior, just like a movement constraint, if I put a dowel on your shoulder, it constrains the likelihood of you going here when you're running, because this becomes more self-evident that it's uncomfortable and ineffective. So I get tall when I run with the dowel. Well, equally, if I move away from the passive PT or the injections, which, let's be honest, for some might be the easier option, it by its very nature increases the value of the next best option, which is the physical work, which by its very nature reveals itself to actually have been the better option all along, because it can result in permanent change. But I would have never entertained that one because it was more effortful. But the second a more effortful option becomes the only option, that effort seems to dissolve because it's number one and has nothing to be compared against. So I don't know what the original question was, but I just wanted to highlight a couple interesting ideas around placebo and where we're at.
I love that, because humans by definition conserve energy. That's evolutionary. So why wouldn't people choose the fix-it approach and want the fix-it approach? And we have people here from all over the world that have been following along. Kylie Posthumus is in South Africa, and there a lot of the questions have been coming, as they have from Wales and elsewhere, about people are wanting passive care. They're expecting passive care. We're in a service industry, so we should give people what they want. But the reality is that we want to actually help people achieve their goals. And we have to help present the information better so that people are motivated to do the things which in the long run will be more likely to help them. And so we're going to talk for a minute about all of these factors and influences which go into affecting what people believe, to your point, Nick, and what's in their mind.
Yeah, for sure.
And so surgery is the ultimate placebo. And the coronavirus, by reducing the access, so by constraining access to elective procedures, has actually not compromised healthcare at all. Here is Rachel Bookbinder and Ian Harris, two great experts, explaining kind of some of the science to a fellow surgeon.
97% of the improvement that people have after arthroscopy is those non-specific effects. It's not the specific effect of the surgery. And if you think that you have better results than the placebo-controlled trials, then I challenge you to do a placebo-controlled trial.
I'm very happy to do placebo controls, but as you know, surgical treatment, by its very definition, doesn't lend itself to a placebo trial. The only one that has been the arthroscopy.
No, it isn't.
No.
They just published one on shoulder arthroscopy, and that showed no improvement.
Sorry, I stand
There is a series of how many surgical placebo trials?
About 30 now.
Yeah, and we're doing one in spine surgery now. I mean, these trials can be done.
So 97% of the results from surgery have to do with the non-specific, i.e. placebo effects. the attribution of success should be to the person, not to the procedure. So we have these dangerous structural asymmetries in our society. On the one hand, the profit of the surgeon is actually a co-conspirator with telling the person that you found the cause of their back pain, and that when they're fed up, you can fix the problem. And so people live in fear that they can't fix themselves, they can't cope with the problem, and there's some agency outside of themselves, which when they're fed up with the problem, will finally cure them, which is, of course, wishful thinking, naive. To Aaron's point, the surgeon is well-meaning. The surgeon is ethical. The clinician who is offering these procedures, whether they're passive physical therapy modalities, chiropractic manipulation, dry needling, injections, NSAIDs, surgeries, stem cells, PRP, we can go on and on. They actually believe in these things, but that doesn't make it the best course of action. It's not best practices. We all suffer inevitably from just human nature. So we undervalue what the facts say, and we accept things disproportionately that confirm our own biases. And this is from an ethics book that's tied in with these ideas that Nick was talking about with respect to uncertainty. We understand now that uncertainty is not a temporary nuisance, which can be chased away by learning rules or surrendering to expert advice, or just doing the status quo, in other words, what others do. Instead, it's a permanent condition of life. So uncertainty is normal. Accepting uncertainty is the scientific approach, and that's why humility is so important. I think that's why Mark Verstegen represented this culture of consciousness, of not taking credit. Moral life is a life of continuous uncertainty, and it takes a lot of strength and resilience and an ability to withstand outside pressures to accept uncertainty. Dr. Levitt taught we work at the acceptable level of uncertainty. So yes, we have standards. It's not just everything goes. And this is a very important concept, which probably should be a foundation in ethics courses taught. Ethics isn't about moralizing. Ethics is about understanding the nature of science and understanding how little we know, and that we work at the acceptable level of uncertainty. So it's not about being a know-it-all. Dr. Levitt famously said that we should keep an open mind. We should be humble. We should keep an open mind for new ideas that sometimes show what we thought or believed before was wrong. And this is why it's so empowering to me to be surrounded by younger people like Ryan, and even younger still like Aaron and Geronimo, and to hear, you know, Aaron's skepticism, and to hear to hear Geronimo's skepticism and Aaron's optimism as like a yin and yang. You know, Geronimo's got that skeptical thing about practitioners, and Geronimo is like, no, you know, it's nobody's fault. Let's cut them some slack. And I think this is not a blame game. This is not a blame game. We're not blaming others. As Rachel said, the person whose fault it is it's our fault. It is the fault of all of the scientific community that they actually believe the nonsense that by disseminating evidence, it would change behavior in the trenches. It doesn't work that way. Knowledge translation is a far more complex undertaking. So yes, we should all be humble and be a learn-it-all, but we can't expect people to stop beating a dead horse. It's an old Cherokee proverb: if your horse dies, get off it. But we can't expect people to just change. It's very hard. One of the hardest scenarios for a change agent is when you've invested massive energy and time in a cause or project that you're passionate about, and it doesn't work out, to be able to walk away. This is incredibly hard to do. When we look at the different procedures that we've invested in, preventive measures aren't profitable for the medical industrial complex. So the medical industrial complex, unfortunately, is at odds with the progress that we're talking about. We see something like meniscus surgery, a largely debunked procedure except for young people and very old people. Almost everybody else in the middle, which is the majority, it's the #1 orthopedic surgery. It's no better than placebo. We neglect the lifestyle factors. Why? Because of the reasons that Nick suggested. Most doctors believe that people won't comply with lifestyle change, so they don't bother. So when we look at the evidence, we should become as familiar as we can. As Matt Ray with University of Alabama says, I'm familiar with it, but done in the past. I'm just not married to any of it. So he has that learn it all philosophy, but he does know what the evidence is. And so we have to be prepared to be, I think, agile, so that's really the learn it all approach. And we have to have the courage to realize that we may need to change. Stephen Jobs personified this. It's more fun to be a pirate than to join the Navy. And what we see today is that there is so much bias out there. Biased presentation of low certainty evidence is common. This is from a May 2020 study. Biased presentation of low certainty evidence is misleading. And biased presentation of low certainty evidence can inadvertently support low value care. So one of the hallmarks of low value care is overdetection. Overdetection of prostate issues, of tumors from mammograms, breast cancer, slow growing breast cancers. We found with the frequency of mammograms that had been recommended by the United States guidelines over the last 10, 20, 30 years, that actually for every 5 lives that were saved, 7 were lost. And tens of thousands of women suffered needlessly from overdetection of slow-growing cancers in the hopes of finding those 5 that were fast-growing. But the very act of the biopsies and the interventions actually killed 7. So in Europe, there was a pivot. There was a recalibration of the statistics to identify the proper frequency of the imaging to detect the cancers. And now we realize that we should do the preventive mammograms less frequently. If we look at the prostate, we see that we should hardly ever be doing the PSA assessment, that the cost way outweighed the benefit. And of course, most of us are in the musculoskeletal space, and here you see on this slide that complex imaging for back pain has increased by 50% over 20 years, despite guideline advice and education campaigns telling us to slow down. The more, at Stanford, they said, the more imaging centers in a community, the more surgeries that are performed. So we're not in the camp of saying structure isn't important, but it doesn't mean damage. These are coincidental findings by age. The older you are, the more wrinkles you have. It doesn't mean that you have a disease. So no more nocebo. We want to stop this language of telling people that they're shattered, that they're broken, that they're compromised, that they have torn cuffs and labrums, that they have narrow spinal canal and ruptured or herniated discs. If a person believes their tissue is vulnerable and can be easily injured, they are more likely to avoid usual activities or to move too carefully. And this limits the potential for recovery. So no wonder knowledge translation is so challenging. In 17 years, you only get 14% of research findings adopted into practice. This is the great ball and chain that we've disseminated evidence for 30 years. As Ryan said, the evidence about reassurance and reactivation hasn't changed. We've known this. Geronimo's frustrated by it as a student. But we have to realize that there are social factors at play. This is not only about the information, it's about people. It is increasingly clear that simply expecting individual clinicians to adhere more closely to guidelines is not going to bridge this gap. We have a study that just came out. Geronimo's been highlighting this study in the last week. Physical therapists' use of recommended care has not changed since the 1990s. Physical therapists' use of treatments of unknown value appears to be increasing. And one explanation for these trends is the challenge of keeping up with all of the information that's out there. We're overwhelmed. We're suffering from a crisis of too much information. The percentage of physical therapists providing untested treatments appears to be increasing over time. And there are many explanations for this. One is keeping up. It's very hard to keep up. So it's nobody's fault. We all know how hard it is to keep up with the ginormous amount of research that gets published every day. Increased exposure to treatments of unknown value. Just think about Instagram. Just look at Instagram. Every hype and trend. Pavel Tsatsouline talked about this with Joe Rogan. It's not about the latest fitness trend. We're not chasing trends. We're not trying to keep up with the latest gizmo or gadget. We're exposed to so much information. It's overwhelming. What is our defense against this? I want to throw this back to Nick. Nick, how do you recommend to coaches that they arm themselves so that they're not overwhelmed by the tidal wave, the avalanche of all the different opinions?
We must have been reading each other's brain today between your placebo slides and what I said before you showed them and what you're talking about here, Craig. This is fascinating stuff. I was trying to formulate how I might give my 2 cents on this, thinking this is the direction we were going. And I'm just going to riff here a little bit about this idea. I've never shared it with really anyone outside of my wife, who's like, yeah, honey, that's great. And that's this. First of all, why do we feel overwhelmed? Yes, there's a lot of information out there, but there's no one with a gun to your head saying that you have to try to read it all, but yet you still feel overwhelmed. So why do we feel overwhelmed? And again, I think it's heavily based on a psychological construct that's built on a literal construct. So let's take a Perform Better conference, just as an example. And you can think of any conference. You go to Perform Better and you see Craig Liebenson give a talk. And you start to log what Craig said and all the different things he referenced. Then you go over here and you hear Mike Boyle give a talk. And you log everything that he said. And then you go over and hear Gray Cook, and then so on and so forth. Then you have your hallway chat. Then you buy 2 or 3 of the books that were recommended at the Q&A. Maybe you start reading those before you go to the social. And 4 days in now, you've listened to who knows how many talks, maybe 30 talks plus your hallway. And it's this infinite, it feels like this infinite amount of information. And this is what I think we do. And I don't know if anyone else agrees. I'd love to hear what you guys think. And that is, we create this avatar in our mind. And this avatar in our mind has the intelligence of Craig, Mike Boyle, the person I met in the hallway, all the articles that I see on Twitter, Facebook. There's an avatar in our mind that exists. Call it your industry avatar, for lack of a better phrase, that knows everything. And whether or not we know it, I believe that's the benchmark we set for ourselves. And the second we set that psychological benchmark, we have just created an impossibility. There is no way of scaling that mountain. There's no way of achieving that end state. But we have to remember, once we go through that thought experiment, that avatar does not exist. That AI does not exist. Craig does not know what Mike knows. Mike does not know everything that Gray knows. Craig doesn't know everything that Ryan knows and Aaron knows and Nick knows and vice versa. We all have one piece of the puzzle and a very small piece of the puzzle. And I believe once we recognize that we have that small piece of the puzzle, it can allow us to take this massive deep breath and say, okay, my piece of the puzzle is this. And it's not to say that I'm not a generalist. We know in our domains, we have to have a level of understanding across many, many areas. But to think that we can actually be an expert in all of them is a fool's agenda. However, we can most certainly deep dive and take on the responsibility of a piece of the puzzle. And I say that very broadly because a piece can still be quite a big topic with many components involved. And thus, inevitably, we deep dive into that. And so take me as an example. When I started teaching, let's say, coach education back in 04, 05, and have been doing it ever since, I had to be a generalist across many, many different topics. But inevitably, I reached a level where I no longer felt authentic. I no longer felt sincere. I had reached the cap on how deep I could go in any one area. I realized that the areas of recovery and program design and so on and so forth were so deep and so rich. There were not lifetimes singular, but lifetimes plural in every one of those areas. And again, for me to even think I could exhaust one of them myself would be a fool's agenda. And so we have one of two options. We either achieve the minimal standard, which is still might be quite high across all the domains that we feel are relevant for what we do, and let's call that person a generalist. Or we maintain that status and we try to attack one piece as deeply as we can. But what causes the anxiety, what causes the uncertainty is flipping from one area to a next with no purpose, no outcome, no end state in mind. And so when people ask me, Nick, how have you gone about dealing with the noise and trying to be very deep and precise in what you do? I've answered it a couple different ways, but this is the summary of how I go about it. I look at my current occupation and what I do. I ask myself, of all of the different skill sets I currently require to do my job, which one, if you would, is the weakest? And if changed for the better, would make the biggest difference on my athletes or the coaches I work with. And once I've identified my weak link that I feel, if upgraded, to use Craig's word, will make the biggest difference, I go at that 1 inch wide and 100 miles deep. And I filter out the remainder of the noise. And don't get me wrong, as I go down the evidence or the insight, whatever it is, I will go wherever it takes me. If it takes me into another domain, if it takes me out of strength and conditioning and into linguistics, I will go there. But I follow the story and I go on the journey. But here's the key thing that I've always done. And I've done it as much by chance as I have by choice. And that is, I always establish an outcome that I seek to achieve as a litmus test, as an assessment that I have gone far enough down that path. And for me, oftentimes that has been through my physical coaching of athletes and the results we seek to achieve and measure, but oftentimes also my ability to write a paper or give a presentation in a forum like this to see, can I authentically to myself more than anyone else present this back in a sincere manner? And if I can do that, then probably I can say that I know something about this thing. And all I do is I go through that process again and again and again. And if you were to ask me, Nick, what journey are you on now? Well, I told you last time. It was a spark when I was 19. It was a seed that was planted in 2009 on how we coach. And I believe I'm on the journey that will take me to my grave, because that's how important how we coach is, and that's how much work is to be done.
Wow. I love that. So, you know, the authenticity that we need to be able to kind of establish what the benchmark is. I think you just gave us the skeleton key for how to separate the wheat from the chaff of all of this incredibly just the blitzkrieg of information that we're all faced with. It's overwhelming, but if we are humble enough, if we're authentic and we know what we need to work on in order to be able to achieve our goal, to be able to serve the people, the clients, the athletes, the patients that we're seeing, then that will put the wind in our sails to go that 100 miles deep in that direction, that 1 inch wide direction. This is true, I think, for how we
Craig,
tee
before you
up.
finish, sorry, Craig,
Yeah.
can I say one thing though? And I believe this fully, and this is not a pessimistic comment, because I really am not a pessimistic person. I think it's a realistic comment. You know, more than likely the people listening to this do not fall into the category that I'm about to articulate, but maybe you do. And that is, if this is just a job and you are satisfied doing the best you can, it's not that you want to do a bad job, but you're also not looking to be Craig Liebenson or Ryan Chow or Aaron Kubel or Nick Winkelman. Many of us who do this, it's not by choice. Craig, what you do, I think I speak for it. It's not by choice. There is an inner fire inside of Craig Liebenson that pulls him forward to read, to dive deeper, to understand, to go broader, that is part of your DNA, and that's inside of me. That's not inside of everybody. And this is true of humans in general, of cross domains. So let's be very clear. A lot of the anxiety, I believe, comes from holding yourself to a standard that you actually don't want to hold yourself to. And it is okay to be good at what you do. No more, no less. But just be authentic with yourself and identify that. And therefore, the second you've done that, the stress about the Twitter feed and the Facebook feed starts to dissolve. At the end of the day, though, you need to be upheld to the standard of your occupation and to the clients you serve or patients you serve. That I will hold you accountable to. But to think you have to be more than that, no way. And I would never want to put that on anybody.
No, I think that's a really helpful kind of life raft, because people should ask themselves and inquire within. And this is the ideal time to inquire within during this crisis. But ask yourself, what is your purpose? And when you find your purpose, you're going to find your passion. But I think if we translate this idea that you're talking about, that we introspect amongst ourselves internally as to what is my weak link and what do I need to work on in order to create the best outcome based on a litmus test in the people, the population that I serve, that also is translated to our needs analysis of our athletes and of our patients. Can we find out what their demands are? And I know we're going to get into this, Nick. And then can we find out if they have what they need? And where can we make the greatest impact in our relationship with them? What can we help them to see that they were blind to, where they can make the biggest difference? Because the relationship that we establish with people is one of trust. We want to achieve relatedness. We want to find out what their goals are. We want to show them that we understand and we're all about their goals. It's not about our goals. And then can we actually make a measurable change? So I want to throw this to you, Ryan. I know that you're just chomping at the bit when Nick starts off on this subject of finding the chink in the armor, whether it's amongst the professional and their growth, their ongoing growth. And of course, we are a community. We're a community of passionate people. I think the people in this room, these are the outliers. We are the tip of the spear in our collective professions. We have people here from Cyprus. Lampras is here from Cyprus. Kaylee and Mark Templeton are here from South Africa. We have Matt Lowe, one of our experts, is here learning from England. We have Megan Pomeransky from Winnipeg, Andy Bear from Kentucky. We have people from all over that are joining us today. Coaches, physical therapists, chiropractors. This is a learn it all society. But Ryan, how do you transcribe this in your space?
Can you give me a more precise question? I kind of lost.
Yeah, the bridging the gap. So this idea about gapping that Carmen Bott talks about with our athletes and our clients, we've got to find out their demands. We've got to find out if they have what they need. But how do you educate people that this is going to give them the ROI? Most people have been sold a bill of goods that they're going to just get fixed by getting dry needled, or foam rolling or K-tape, or stem cells is an option for them, or they need a scan to figure out why they have the pain, when in fact it may be right in front of them that they want to be able to run and they've got knee tendinopathy, and it's in reality, in your mind, an under preparation syndrome, and they just don't have the single leg squat strength to control the sagittal plane and thereby control the frontal and transverse planes. How do you help people to understand that that's where they're going to get the greatest value?
Yeah, I think that's probably, I mean, I think that's why I'm drawn to FPM in the first place. How originally meeting you is understanding that it's principles and not cookie cutters, because everybody's needs analysis, their profile is completely different. There's no way we can dumb it down to just make it like, if this, then do that, because every person is so unique and so complex. And I think what I've learned over time and studying different subject matters is that you have to identify their needs biologically, but also as studying some of Nick's stuff, it's understand their language, their education, their where they're coming from, who they are, what their story is, and then creating an experience that matches that. So, you can see the same biology or pathology, the same thing 100 times, but someone's background or their understanding or the nocebos or miseducation they've been given, they're all unique to them. So creating, I use the onboarding process or the profiling or the initial evaluation, taking an hour and a half to almost 2 hours sometimes, drawing out all that information and then creating an experience that matches it. Meaning I have to convince their mind, but I also have to convince their nervous system. They have to feel what I just explained to them, and what I explain to them and what I show them is different based on who they are and what they need. So I think it's there's a lot of art to match the science, and I think it takes a little practice, but it's really about I think getting to know the person in front of you, building rapport, and then relating things to them. And I think that's the whole Alfred role in a nutshell in my mind.
Ryan, I got to jump in here because I just had a mind explosion. Heard it now. And here we go. The word, the title of my book and many others, the secondary title is The Art and Science of Teaching Movement. And I've always felt like if I talked about the science of coaching, I came across like a stiff. And if I talked about the art of coaching, I came across that I just didn't know the science well enough yet to be certain. And what I realized right there, I don't know if others agree, but it's not art that we're talking about here. It's a different A. What you're doing there, Ryan, is you're adapting as a coach. Think about it. That's what when we say the art of anything, that is real. What we're really saying is our ability to adapt to anything. And so the science is based in the principles. The art is how we adapt those to the individuals. I actually think adapt might be a more instructive word than art.
Yeah, that's definitely going into the explanation or the toolbox of ways to explain things, because I think you just simplified what I was thinking and it made it very digestible so I think hopefully a lot of people can start to think of it and use it that way. Yeah, it's amazing.
I've been thinking about the word art for over a decade, and whatever you just said triggered the mind pump saying, Nick, art is adapt. Get on with it and move on. Let's go.
Amazing.
And adapt is change. Yeah. So if we're going to have a litmus test where we're going to try to find the weak link and get people from where they are to where they need to be in order to achieve their goals, we know that there has to be a sufficient and appropriate stimulus in order to challenge that person beyond their comfort zone so that they can upskill, hopefully automatically, like Geronimo was saying before. It's an auto-regulation. It's not a conscious thing. It's a guide by the side thing. And it has to do with the environment we create. I just realized I have to take responsibility here, folks. A lot of you are just joining us in the last 15 minutes because one of the Zoom announcements that went out actually said 10 a.m. We've gone through 10 of these, and it's always said 9 a.m. and this one said 10 a.m. So I don't know how it was we had such a large turnout at 9 o'clock when we started in California Pacific Standard Time. But I guess we have a lot more people that are joining the room now. And I apologize to you if you missed the first 45 minutes. We did start a couple minutes late, but it'll be on the YouTube, and you can catch what you missed. And of course, we'll go over a little bit, but I know Nick is going to have other things to do with his family at this time as well. But so I want to apologize to those of you who missed live the first part. Let's keep this puppy rolling. So I think culture is crucial. What we're seeing in the pandemic is that when our environment changes, when there's a social change, that influences our individual behavior more than anything else, more than knowledge. The failure of knowledge translation to bridge the gap from evidence dissemination to implementation is certainly proof of that. And the pandemic is proof of concept that top-down will reduce debunked elective procedures for musculoskeletal pain. Now the problem is when we go back, how are we going to prevent the rat race from reappearing? How are we going to avoid going back into all of our patterns and our ruts, the rhythms of our previous life? How are we going to use this unprecedented event to change us, to trigger the adaptation? This is going to be the challenge of a lot of people's lives. Obviously, Greta Thunberg talks about the need for change, and she speaks truth to power at the United Nations, and she lives the example. But of course, for young people today, this is a very frustrating time to see that it may be irreversible, the danger that we've done to the climate, to the environment. But then along comes a black swan. And granted, our economies are suffering. Granted, there is a healthcare tragedy associated with this, nowhere worse than in your backyard, Ryan, in New York City. But there's also these unanticipated benefits. We need to focus away from the deliberate choices. And right now we have something that none of us asked for. We need to focus towards habitual automatic choices that are likely to be influenced by our environment. The group in Holland, the upstream team, looks at changing people's behavior about their relationship to food to help stem the tide of the obesity crisis. We have childhood obesity on the rise. We have type 2 diabetes, adult onset diabetes in children on the rise. We know that children who are sedentary are at great risk for healthcare problems 3 and 4 decades later. So those seeds are planted early on in adolescence. And it's no amount of lecturing and pedagogy and explication that's going to change behaviors. There are social factors at play, things we've talked about with Matt Lowe and Peter Stillwell and Paula Silva. There is so much about the social that really cracks the code on the warring tribes of pain science and biomechanics in the musculoskeletal space. As Bill Murray says, if running on a treadmill was the only way to recharge our phones, we'd be the healthiest people on the planet. So talk about a constraint, right, Nick? Can we be the designers? Can we be the architects of that adaptation? This is our challenge. This is the Alfred moment for all of us. It sounds a bit crazy, but it was almost more personal. A qualitative patient and clinical experience of physical therapist prescribed training for knee osteoarthritis via Skype. So it was almost more personal. People are used to screens. There's, we couldn't have guessed it, but yeah, it seems more personal to be in person. But hey, let's look at the data here. It may be more personal not to be distracted. It may be more personal to know that your coach, your clinician is with you and nobody's interrupting them. Their attention isn't scattered. Sounds crazy. I think we're all trying to achieve the same thing. The incredible biomechanist and kinesiologist from Toronto, Ontario, Canada, Tyson Beach, said, if we're evidence-based, we all end up in the same spot, promoting and facilitating physical activity and exercise interventions via behavior change. So we know that there's the axis between psychology and biomechanics. And the psychology may be the determining factor, which is why the power of our words is so strong, because the words have meaning that Nick has talked about, and these have value that we interpret through our own experience and our own context. And then if it's the right triggers, it catalyzes the change or the adaptation, which gives us that impact, that affects that litmus test, that outcome. Ultimately, like our guest in our series, Lorimer Mosley, says, we are in the behavior change game, ultimately. And I think that it's not about us just doing things to people physically. It's about the change must come from them, which is to Mark Versteegen's culture that he created, that you can't take credit for this. You can take the blame. It's your fault if you don't create the environment. And that's why Alfred over Batman is so pivotal for us. But if the person responds, it's because they rose to the challenge. Between, this idea about adaptation reminds me, Nick, of Viktor Frankl's famous quote about between stimulus and response is a space. And in that space is a person's opportunity. In that space is a person's strength and power to choose their response. This is the ultimate pro tip, the ultimate hack, is to provide the appropriate stimulus, the relatable stimulus that shows that we create an alliance with that person, that we listen to them, that we know their sport, their demands, their activities, their goals, their fears, their worries, their concerns. We know their situation. And so now we've created that opportunity. We've created that stimulus that addresses the chink in their armor, and one which is one where there can be an achievable plan, not just something that's pie in the sky, but one where they can have tangible hope and an achievable plan. Between stimulus and response is a space. In that space is our freedom and our power to choose our response. That's the bedrock for the adaptation. For me, Viktor Frankl's words aimed in psychology, they have everything to do with coaching, don't they, Nick? I know you're familiar with Viktor's work.
I feel so strongly around behavior change that I might have said this last time. In my book, I actually wrote a whole chapter on behavior change for coaches. Chapter 7 is called The Roadmap. And I basically took the Power of Habit, Charles Duhigg's work, and Atomic Habit, James Clear's work, and a number of others, and just retooled it for how coaches upgrade their behavior. And so I think as difficult as it is to upgrade our client or our patient's behavior, it's equally difficult to upgrade our own, which is why what's interesting, what we're talking about tonight is we're talking about upgrading patient behavior. But let's be honest, we're talking about upgrading coaches' behavior in pursuit of upgrading client behavior. And so there's two sides to this behavioral upgrade conundrum that we face. One is on the side of the patient, but one is on the side of the practitioner. I find behavior change to be something quite interesting. I think in our domain, our field in general, so much of what we call behavior change or upgrading behavior is embedded in strategies. You know, you have a current strategy around your eating. You have a current strategy around your movement. Everyone does, whether or not they like it. Everyone has a strategy. You know, the habits are the things that we do constantly without any unconscious consideration. So we all have habits. It's just a question of whether or not those habits are productive in what society calls productivity, healthy eating, fit body, so on and so forth. And so everyone has habits, but the question is, how do we go about upgrading them? And so often what we do is, as coaches, and I don't mean this to be pandering, but we're strategy salesmen. We're strategy salespeople. We say, here's a better nutrition strategy. Here's a better movement strategy. You know, but ultimately the person has to identify that they have a problem worth solving before they want one of our solutions. And so it can't be us identifying their problem. We might guide them to that, but they are the one that has to own the problem. And their desire to change needs to be larger than the effort required to change. You know, and BJ Fogg talks about this a lot in Micro Habits, or Tiny Habits, I believe is his book. And James Clear talks about it in Atomic Habits. So we need to make sure that, yeah, I might want to change, but is my desire to change as strong as the physical effort that is going to be required to actually change it? And many people's behavior says no. Otherwise, we wouldn't have obesity. Many people, by their behavior, says no, my desire to change is weaker, right, than the effort required to do the changing. And so I fall back into the path of least resistance. And so I think we have to look at this holistically as a complex systems problem. Society has a lot to do, if you would, with lowering the barrier to making better decisions. If we walk into any grocery store, we immediately see from a society perspective where we hedge our bets. You know, if we look at the design of certain cities, we see how mobile they are versus if you go to one like Amsterdam where it's completely set up to move. So I'm not saying that we can default responsibility on the society, but very much so society establishes many of the constraints that either upregulate the difficulty or downregulate the difficulty of making certain decisions. I think as practitioners, our job is to identify the solutions for our patients, our clients, within the landscape of constraints. You know, we working in our clinic cannot go up to Government Hill and make a change. So we have to look at the solutions to navigate the constraints as is. But then we also have to assist as best we can our clients and patients being introspective, as we said earlier, around identifying what we want in our careers. They've got to really want it. I cannot coach desire. I cannot coach someone to want to learn. I cannot coach someone to want to change. I can put a picture in their mind that allows them to sample a different life. But every magazine you pick up at the store is a virtual reality of what your life could be like with a better body, a better diet, more money. But are those catalysts strong enough for change? No. I have got to want it myself. And again, I'm not an expert in this area at all, and I don't mean this to be pessimistic at all, but I do believe that true change, significant change, requires trauma. Now, I don't mean that to be physical trauma or psychological trauma, but there is trauma. There needs to be a catalytic event that is so strong that it literally knocks you off your path and says, I need to find a better way forward. And that could be something that happened to a friend. It could be something that happened to a movie star. It could be something that happened to you. I don't know. But I believe true change oftentimes requires, and if it's going to change long-term, some level of trauma. And trauma might be too harsh of a word. But we've all seen the stories where the person woke up one day, morbidly obese, put on their shoes, and just started walking. No trainer, no coach, and boom, 6 months later, right, they've lost all this weight, their life has changed. But if you get into those conversations, there's trauma. Something has happened. And the trauma isn't like a car crash. It isn't always acute. It's an accumulation. And so, and I know this for me is a truth because this was my own experience. When I was 16, I had accumulated enough, call it trauma, of being made fun of as being the overweight fat kid. And ultimately, it took me 16 years for that trauma to then turn into something that says, you know what? I want to finally look on the outside like I feel on the inside. And I harbor no ill will against any of those people, because kids, even if you're the one dishing it out, you have your own trouble. And life brings trauma. So I don't say that to look for pity. All I'm saying is life gives us trauma if we know where to look. And ultimately, you got to use it and redirect it. But I believe that trauma needs to reach a certain threshold before people are ready to change. And so just remember that if their decision is to continue to eat the bad food and not move, don't judge them. We're not here to judge them. We're here to be empathetic, provide solutions, even guide them towards introspection that might accelerate their desire to take those solutions on. But as long as we are the advocates for change, for people that are ready to change, I think we're doing good by this world.
I love that. You know, that's such a powerful perspective, because it's very easy to judge. And when we see people that aren't changing, it's very easy to judge and label them as they're not understanding, they're not thinking, they're not paying attention, they're lazy, they just want a quick fix. But the reality is that we don't know about people's pasts. And really, this is our job, is to learn as much about that person as they will let us, which is why when we're first with people and we're taking their story, we listen. We've learned that we interrupt too much and we don't give people a chance to tell their story. So like Professor McGill spends like an hour on the history, I spend like 45 minutes on the history. I want to hear the story. And when they're done, like Guido van Ryssigem says, is there anything else? And then following the principles and the steps, the methodology of motivational interviewing, we pause, we take it in, and then we reiterate it to the person. And then we ask for confirmation. Did we miss anything? Did we get it right? And then we ask questions. We prioritize their concerns, their goals, what they're after, all to create that bridge to be empathetic, which is the beginning point for creating that journey forward, that opportunity. This is a black swan event like this, or when somebody finally comes in, it's a gift of injury. It is an opportunity, and we shouldn't judge people. Galileo said that he can learn something from even the most ignorant person. If Galileo said that, who are we to judge? There's no place in judging. It's almost like yoga. Yoga is about consciousness. Yoga is about awareness. Yoga is not about how flexible are you. Yoga is just about getting in touch with yourself and connecting your mind and your body, about humility. The body is a temple. And so our interactions with people, it should also be almost like a place of worship where we're observing things as they are, agnostically, without prejudgment. This, I think, is the reasons why Rachel and I are both fond of the Dostoevsky idea that processes or methodologies and systems, they prejudice us. We should observe agnostically without prejudice. Krishnamurti said the hardest thing is to observe without judgment. Louis Pasteur said there's a lot we can learn by observation. When you watch Dan Path, he's got no agenda. He's just observing, and he's sharing what he sees. Yonda said every exercise is a test. We want to observe to find those places where we can get the greatest ROI. And sometimes the observation isn't of their mechanics. It's like what Tyson Beach said. It's of their story. It's that listening moment. I know we have a question, Ryan. Do you want to share the question that we have?
Yeah. So from an anonymous attendee, I think we don't see the big picture as clinicians, and we fear sharing with others as to they might steal our clients, thus affecting our bottom line. So the question would be, how as a solo practitioner do we overcome this? And I'm overcoming this, and in overcoming this hurdle, our bottom line increases, but most importantly, clients' patients are better, healthier, and happier, and refer more to us and those we share patients and clients with. So the question is basically getting to the point that sometimes there's it seems like it's counterintuitive to collaborate with others, but I think knowing that if you look at the scoreboard when it comes to chronic disease, pain, need in guidance, coaching for health, fitness, pain, or injury, it's overwhelming. It's so overwhelming that we shouldn't feel like we need to operate from a place of scarcity, but a place of abundance, because it's one of the biggest health problems of today. And also, if you do a little more research on how people are spending their time, their money, and their effort, people do value your services. And if someone else is better suited to help you, then you're ultimately going to look better. And that is that's going to give you more credit. It's going to get more people to want to see you, because ultimately I think people recognize when, just like the whole Alfred and Batman conversation is, I think at first people are hesitant to switch roles from Batman to Alfred, because they're afraid maybe that their contribution to someone getting better isn't there. But I think most people realize that when they've been suffering for a long time, or when things haven't changed, or when they've been trying to change their own behavior or their situation, it hasn't worked. I think it's usually a very big moment. I think people don't seek help when they have pain. I think people seek help when that pain starts to change in their lives and affect their identity. So I think even if you play a small role, people still remember. So I think that's a good way to keep in the back of your mind that it is always best to put the person first, put the needs and service of that person first, and the rest will take care of itself. You know, it's hard, I think, but I think it reminds me of what Nick was just talking about with Mark Verstegen. So I think hopefully some of that data will help you to knowing about spending behavior and epidemiology.
If you have a follow-up question, please post that and we'll try to follow up on that. So, you know, if we can appreciate that pain is a protective device and not a measure of tissue damage, if our language can express that, and we can communicate that clearly, that can change the game. So much about how people feel about their limitations is based on false information, is based on somebody telling them they're broken, that the problem is just the tip of the iceberg and how messed up they are. And that's really on us. Here obviously is the Galileo quote, I never met a man so ignorant that I couldn't learn something from him. So we want to, if we want to empower people, then we have to meet people where they are and listen to their stories, what Professor McGill called the gift of injury. When people come in because of a black swan event or because of an accumulation of problems, that is the opportunity bypass. And so we don't have a fix-it methodology. We follow principles. And we find what Nick was talking about, where we can get the greatest return on investment, where we should intervene, and then we intervene. And our intervention hopefully will therefore have meaning to a person, because it's person-centered, it's athlete-centered. And these are our principles. And the fact that we're person-centered and we're prepared to be wrong and learn from our mistakes, that's what makes this scientific. Aristotle spoke about first principles, and we see in modern physics how important it is to test hypotheses and to realize that our ideas, our rational ideas about what we think is going on, that is a hypothesis, and that's something we need to test, and we need to have a litmus test so that we can observe whether there's been a change, whether adaptation has occurred. And if it hasn't, or if it doesn't look like it's forthcoming, then of course we should be prepared to pivot. So it's such a pleasure to have Nick here to converse about how, whether we're in a coaching environment or a clinical environment, words do matter. They matter tremendously. What we say affects performance. If you think, you stink. If you do it wrong, things happen quickly. Imagine a baseball hitter who has to react faster than even the blink of an eye. A thought, a negative thought, a conscious thought is going to end a career. You can't depend upon that. Your training has to be so hardwired that you're able to pick up on tells from the pitcher as far as whether they're throwing a certain pitch. This is all something that's subcortical. So we have to train people so that they adapt. And rehab is really just like in performance. Rehab is about training in the presence of injury. Rehab isn't about a person being passive, because there's no change then. There's no change whatsoever. We haven't addressed any capacity shortfall, and that's why this Alfred idea is so powerful for us. We want people to attribute to themselves. We don't want them to attribute to something outside themselves, because people will have relapses. Life will intervene, and there'll be other flares. Flares are expected. They're not unexpected. And so if the person's dependent on us or a pill or a surgery or a shot, then they're not resilient. Then they are fragile. And so the elephant in the room is that we provide too much medicine in musculoskeletal practice, too much manual therapy. We need to teach people what they can do for themselves. So what can we let go of? We're not saying let go of manual therapy. We're not saying let go of corrective exercise. We're just saying maybe we need to just prioritize a few other things first so the person gains self-efficacy. If we guide by the side, then the person becomes empowered, because we use a clinical audit process, and they feel like they have more range of motion after we've shown them to do certain things, and they realize, wow, okay, I can repeat this. I can do this tonight. I can do it tomorrow. I don't need to go back and get needled again. The needling is great. It's just an add-on, though. It's not the primary thing. So what can we let go of? Rehab is to show a patient what they can do for themselves. Rehab isn't to fix things. It's not to balance things or correct things. We all have this low-hanging fruit. Universally, at the age of about 30, we start to atrophy. It's measurable. So there's a litmus test. There is measurable muscle atrophy by the age of 40. It progresses at about 8% loss of muscle mass per decade after the age of 40. It accelerates after the age of 70, and it falls below a certain threshold of competency about the age of 50 or 60, which is why arthritides get the blame as being the cause of disabling pain when a person is 50, when actually the problem has more to do with the person's physical capacity and muscle atrophy than it does with what's on their image as far as pathology. We can see that performance suffers as we age also because of the same phenomenon of loss of muscle mass. And we see the seeds are sown early. By the time a person is 5, children are hitting about 50% of the physical activity guidelines, the work of Stomaticus from Australia. What a shit show this is in the modern world. If we look back at people in the 1940s, people in the 1940s had less arthritis than people today. If we look back at people in the industrial age, they had less arthritis. We have their bones. We look back at fossil records of people 7 million years ago. Hominoids had less arthritis. We have the fossils. We are getting older, younger. We are less active. We have what Hawking said, the problem of the modern world, the double whammy of eating too much and moving too little. And so now we suffer from sarcopenia, leading to thus falls and frailty. Mosley talked about this, the loss of muscle mass that occurs in astronauts. We should treat our patients like they've returned from space. They've deconditioned. From the age of 40, as we said, 8% loss of muscle mass per decade. And it's reversible. We have a litmus test. We can impact this. We can build strength. Precedes power. You need to have that starting strength in order to be able to move that, your mass, in a flash, as a linebacker might have to. But you have to have that starting strength. Matt Ray posted today, we need a certain percentage of our body weight in our squat. And this will improve our speed. So strength precedes power in the training, in the programming. So, these are basic principles. And it's not a question about belief. These are things that maybe not everybody is passionate enough or humble enough to want to learn some of these things about guiding by the side. But the truth is the truth. There are certain things that we know. And Nick has done the deep dive, the inch wide, mile deep dive to teach us about how program be informed by some of these constructs, how we can establish the litmus tests that are relevant for each person so that we can train them in the positional integrity that they need and the patterns that they need so that they have that power that they need. And I hope everybody is going to avail themselves of Nick's book. But guiding by the side is powerful. And I've shown this example at each and every one of our webinars. This person got no corrective exercises. They simply looked at my iPhone and they did that. Looked at my iPhone in front of a room of a few hundred people, and then made whoops, sorry about that, and then made the adjustment on his own to that position, and then made that adjustment. Just seeing heightened the awareness. The person became woke, and like, I can do that. It was empowering because it was easy for them to do. And that gives them the confidence, that mind game. So guiding by the side is powerful. We can gamify things. Yonda knew this, knew that it's not about conscious awareness, that we want to guide by the side. We want to get to the subcortical as quickly as possible. And so our hack for this is the environment. And Nick, you've said the first teacher you meet is all around you. It's called the environment, and it's up to us to create that environment. So I love that in the background here is Coach Like a Caveman, how the environment shapes our movements. And here you talked about the wall already, Nick, and here's the wall being used as the coach. Gray said the best resistance is the one that causes the problem to correct itself. And Pavel is very famous for saying, the wall shall be your coach. When teaching kettlebells in his first video, Enter the Kettlebell. People cast with their arm. They could injure their shoulder casting with the arm. So he wants them to do the snatch facing the wall. So create the environment. When a person is no longer able to change the situation, they're forced, they're challenged to change themselves. Nick, I think this Viktor Frankl quote is equally appropriate as the other, because it's telling us that we have the power to change the environment. And it's up to us to create the environment where the person will be constrained in relevant ways and challenged at the edge of their capability so that they will start to problem solve on their own, which will make it stash in their subconscious.
Yeah, and I think what's interesting is the environment, no matter what, is the number one coach, because it is the thing that we perceive. The environment, while it has a literal form, we perceive it as a construct in our mind. Even as you hear my words, the word words hit your consciousness 500 milliseconds after I said it. And so the environment around us is a construct that we then recreate turn around and add color to in our mind. And so it's something so powerful. But the environment by itself, in its pure adulterated form, can only take us so far. That's why I believe behaviorally we have language. Language would not have evolved if it was not important. I truly believe that language would not have evolved if it was not important. And so when we talk about the environment, it's not meant to be in contrast to instructional methods. No, it's about the better use of the environment and better use of instruction. And maybe I'll leave you with this, because I have 2 kids that are preparing to go to bed. And that is, if the environment is a construction of our perception, then language is equally a construction in our perception. And thus I can use language to help you construct an environment in your mind that is as real as any environment you could face, but is simply one that is only materializing in your own mindset. And thus I can have you explode off the line like a jet taking off. I can have you move as if there's a wall in front of you. I can have you get long as if you are a chain being pulled in either direction. Because of our brain's ability to turn physical environments into a perceived reality, I can equally reverse engineer the use of the right language into the exact same perceived reality. And thus I can bring a wall, a hallway, a dumbbell, a barbell, a medicine ball that does not exist into existence by the pure use of my language. And that is why words matter, environments matter. It's how we bring the two together that marry up for the best coaching. But ultimately, it is still about creating an environment that is perceived in the mind and navigated in the real.
That is beautiful. Nick, thank you so much for taking time away from your family. We're going to continue and discuss gamification and wrap up the series. But I want to let you go. We're so grateful that you joined us not once, but twice. And I know this has been freewheeling because you don't know where necessarily I'm going to go.
Well, that's why I love it. I love it. There's been some real sincerity here and interesting stuff that I don't normally talk about in these mediums, which I've absolutely loved. So the pleasure was all mine.
Well, we try to make it unique for you. I don't want you to have to go down the same habitual paths that you always do, but your knowledge and experience is broad, and hearing your insights on these different things. And we can see how it does funnel to these sort of basic principles. I mean, we have to create change, and you've inspired a lot of us, and it's just a pleasure to have you as a fellow traveler on this path. We're not just here for the outliers and the passionate ones. We never know when somebody who has other issues in their life that occupy them so that they're just treading water in the status quo is going to have that opportunity, like the COVID epidemic, to make a change, to make a cataclysmic change. And so we're creating that open door for everybody. And with your book, I think it's going to be there. It's a legacy, and you never know when somebody's eyes will be open and they'll be receptive. So I want to thank you very, very, very much for joining us.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much.
All right.
And I think what we've done tonight is proved what I wrote on a sticky note the other day, and that is our words are a gift to the world, and that gift is a piece of you. So let's keep on giving.
Thank you.
Thank you, everybody.
Thanks for joining us. Thank you. So we're going to continue here for a little bit longer, and we're going to, I know some of you joined at 10, but we also started just a little bit late. And here you see Nick saying, judge yourself not by your client's success with you, but by their subsequent workouts after you. Ryan, we've shared this one a lot. Why don't you express how this impacts how you focus on your training with your clients?
Yeah, this was a game changer for me. It reminds me of an experience I actually had with you, where you had sent me a client that you'd been working with for about a year, who had back pain, and he I'd been working with him for several months. I thought I was doing a great job with him, and you were visiting New York, and then you did a follow-up session with him, and I was like, oh, I can't wait till Craig sees all the great work we've done. And then I'm not there, and the whole thing's a disaster because he was awesome when I was standing over him like a hawk, instructing him on all these exercises. His deadlift looked beautiful when I was there. His squat, his everything looked great. But then as soon as you took away all the things, and this reminds me of what Nick talked about with his sprinters, is it was just, if you just let him go and let him do things on his own, it was no good. So to me, it was a big epiphany because it was fool's gold. He didn't truly get to a place where he was independent with this. It was a false sense of motor learning. It was just a lot of motor control where I was getting him into the right position with good coaching, what I thought was good coaching, but it was short-lived. So the cool thing is right now, today, I'm still working with this gentleman, and he has to learn how to do these workouts on his own during telehealth right now. Now I'm being tested again to see if did I actually teach him now. And he is a lot better because he's doing the original thing that hurt him was a kettlebell swing. And now I didn't even put it in his program, but he felt that he understood the exercise and how to do it well enough that he just picked it up himself. He said, hey, I started doing swings again. They feel great. They don't cause me any back pain. So I'm just going to start, practicing them. And, I gave him a program for it so he could do it. But now I feel like I finally, after all these years, made some progress on this because not only is he physically, biologically able to do the exercise, but from a learning perspective, from an independence perspective, from an empowerment perspective, he was no longer fearful of the exercise. He was no longer, and he could do it. And it looked pretty good where it can develop.
So the gift of COVID was that he was forced to not have you policing him.
Yes, exactly.
It truly became learning instead of control.
Yeah, exactly. It took this thing to figure it out because I didn't know he was going to do that, and I didn't think he was ready. But I learned he actually was.
So Linda Trong is in Calgary, and she's an ACL rehab expert. And one of the big questions everybody always asks it's one of the things that's a ball and chain that drives people back to the fix-it approach. The motor control, corrective exercise, manual therapy approach is people won't comply. They're not motivated. They won't adhere. So how do we improve adherence? How do we enhance adherence, motivation, and compliance? Make it fun, individualize it, get to the low-hanging fruit that Nick was talking about, where you can get the greatest return on investment, and then measure with a litmus test to show them via the audit process that they are making progress, because it is about progress, and progress has to be measurable. We cannot manage what we cannot measure. So our job is to find the baselines and to explain why these are related just as much as their scan is related. It's not that the scans aren't related to the symptoms. It's just the person's not broken. And where can we make the greatest impact? On their hardware or on their software? On their software. On their structure, on their function? On their function. So you can get the greatest change by measuring how they squat, how they lunge. Can a 65-year-old with a knee problem even get up and down from the floor? Probably not. So you can measure that. That's binary. And then you can make an impact. So making exercise enjoyable, social, and convenient appears important for maximizing adherence. So the social. So Ryan, you are testing the social right now. You're doing more group than you've ever done before. What are you finding as far as group exercise?
Group exercise, I think, is in the long run the best thing. It's more sustainable. It's because for a lot of reasons, but a lot of it's because it's fun. You're with other people. You're all doing the same thing. You feel challenged. You have friends, but it also brings out competition. It also takes away from the need to be watched for every little movement. Hypervigilance of exercise goes out the window when you're when you have a pace that you need to keep up for the whole group. Everyone needs to move on the same page, and I think it's better for everyone. And I think for us, a big part of it was to improve access, because one-on-ones are too time-consuming and expensive for everybody. So I think it's the future in terms of how to best work with people.
I love that. I think we've known for a while, there's been studies going back 20 years that showed that group exercise was as group therapeutic exercise in rehab was as effective as one-on-one. That one-on-one had some favorable things early, but then there was regression to the mean. So you might ramp somebody, onboard them one-on-one so you can deal with their individual needs and ideas, in particular nocebos. And then get them in a group where they have to kind of figure it out a little bit. They don't need to be micromanaged. People feel like they're broken. Oh, what if I exercise and one hip is higher than the other? Like, that stuff goes out the window when you're in a group. So one of the other things, and it gets to what you're talking about as far as play, scientists have recently determined that it takes over 400 reps to create a new synapse in the brain, unless it's done with play, in which case 10 to 20. So the competition that you're talking about, Ryan, that's play. Creating a communal environment, that's play. Look at the efficiency of this. So if to Nick's point, people are inherently conserving energy, he used the word lazy, or let's say we have somebody who's not as passionate. Not everybody is as passionate. They just want the path of least resistance. Just fix me. We're all faced with this. This is the majority of the people we see. We've got to be able to make the change. We have to be able to show a litmus test is changing. We have to make it demonstrable. We have to prove it. We're thinking like a scientist, acting like a coach, and gamification is one of the tools of the trade of this. Why? Because it takes, I'm not good at math, but 20 into 200, that's 5%. It's between 2.5% and 5% as hard if you use gamification. So here's an example. I'm in Beijing. That's got to be good for his knees, his hips, and his back. He's having fun. He could do that for hours. I'm going to play it again. The sensory environment. He's also working speed there because he doesn't get that feedback unless he generates that torque. So as Carmen Bott says, I'm big on giving feedback. I'm just not as big on giving cues. Feedback, sensory, the sounds, the smells, the environment, the air. Here we use the ball on the back of Beverly Hills Betty, 94 years old. I don't have to coach up her bird dog. I guide by the side. We make it a competition. Two more. Hold it. Make a fist. We showed this, I believe, at the first webinar. Is that right, Aaron? Reach your heel back. One or two.
We did. Yeah.
Reaching your heel, making a fist. Make a nice firm fist with that right hand. So this is all gamification. This is Alfred stuff. Breathe. Good. All right. Can you grab the ball? This is the best part right here. And stand up. Wow. Terrific. The body is not built to break. It's built to last. Why are we telling people that they're breaking? It doesn't make sense. It is our contention that rehab goals can best be achieved if inspired by the ecological approach to perception and action, an approach that focuses on the dynamics of interacting constraints of the person, the task, and their environment. This is the very famous paper by Daniela Vaz, written with Paula Silva. And I think it expresses perfectly how we want to create things that are ecologically relatable to people and relevant to people, that are fun, that are playful. Again, in Beijing, so much variety, community. The sounds, the music, it's all part of it. Why do children learn faster than adults? Because they learn through the game. So when we train people without it being a game, that's, as Rachel says, that's our fault. That's our fault. Make it a game. I don't know what game this guy is playing here, but people like to compete. He thinks he won. I don't know how he figured out that he won, but who cares? He's active. Einstein said, play the things which please you. This is a letter to his son. So Albert Einstein must have been feeling some guilt because he was away or at work, and his son was being forced to play piano. So you can imagine, German kid, piano teacher, at home with his mom, drudgery, sheer drudgery. And what did Albert Einstein understand? He said, play the things, and he's speaking of the songs, which please you. Even if, I love this, Albert Einstein was a frickin' rebel. Even if the teacher does not assign those, that is the way to learn the most. When you are doing something with such enjoyment that you don't notice that the time passes. So there's just so much here. Albert Einstein, the one who teaches us about the space and time continuum. He's describing the flow state before we had the term flow state. How do you achieve a flow state? By doing the things you enjoy. And if you do the things you enjoy, it's when you learn the most. So who's the architect? Who's the designer? We are. It shouldn't be work. The way to create a stimulus that causes an adaptive response is by achieving buy-in. There has to be relatedness. We have to know about the person. We have to hear their story, to know their goals, their fears, their worries, their concerns, their training history, their sport history, their career goals. When we know the person, we know their story, we know about their biography, then we can create a program. So the profile precedes the program. This is the subject for my upcoming live webinar in a couple weeks. We were supposed to go to New York and do a program. We're going to do it on the web. It'll be 8 hours, and we're going to go over how you create this program. And I'm giving it to you here. It's about the profile. So how do you create the program is answered by how do you create the profile. We're going to upskill this. Adults can become children. Oh my God, they flex their spine. No, it's not about that. It's not about telling the person where their pelvis should be in space. You create the constraint. You change the task. Left and right. Let them figure it out. Then it stashes in their subconscious. Then they learn it. That's motor learning. One of the biggest themes of this webinar series is that motor learning is something I knew nothing about until I wrote the Functional Training Handbook. And I became a student, and I realized that skill acquisition is about motor learning, and skill acquisition requires that you come up with tasks that constrain the person, and then the person has to figure out how to solve the problem. When they do that, it transfers into their life, into their other activities. The skill is then learned, and thus motor learning is not the same as motor control. Motor control is where you're telling them what to do and not do, but that's not fun. And so there's A, psychologically no adherence, compliance, and motivation, and B, there's no adaptation or learning that would be transferable into times of stress when people are going to default to what's subconscious. So set up the environment and let them problem solve. This is what gamification is about. The person figures it out for themselves. Another example, there's infinity examples. I'm just sharing a couple of my favorites here. Hey, you can do this at home, 2 tennis rackets. Clear a little space where you're in one of the larger rooms of your house or in your front yard or backyard. Working eye-hand coordination, athletic foundation, quick feet, and gamify it. Competition. Everybody loves this stuff, even the greats.
This is one of our favorite exercises we always do. And I like to mess it up, but you know, it has had a bit of an evolution over the last sort of 10 years, this exercise is here and me. We always laugh about it.
Roger Federer is always learning. The exercise has been evolving over a 10-year period, but they always have fun. The secret to sustainable athleticism. So I want to share a patient here. This is a person whose son emails me. My mom has been having a bad knee. She went to the doctor and he told her she had arthritis. I spoke to her. She goes, I'm scared now. The pain has progressed to the other knee. She saw a surgeon. He said it was a meniscus, a torn meniscus. He said, let's see in 6 weeks, but I don't want you to exercise because you have hypertension. Oh my God. Can you believe this, Ryan? So she became a fragilista. She started to equate every hurt with harm. She stopped walking due to feeling pain points. Would that have happened had the surgeon not told her she had a torn meniscus without telling her that lots of people have a torn meniscus? Would that have happened if he didn't tell her, oh, you have hypertension, don't exercise? She's afraid of the sounds the knee is making. It's popping. I will say this, if nothing else, hopefully we realize that the body is built to last, not built to break. And therefore, withholding exercise is associated with measurable harm. What's measurable is the harm that befalls a person when we give them nocebo advice, when we manage them away from load, when they become overprotective and underprepared. What we should be doing is reassuring and reactivating, which is what the evidence has been saying for 30 years, but that evidence, while disseminated, has not been implemented. This is the knowledge translation dilemma. But the COVID epidemic is making it so all of us, even those who have lots of treatments that really help people with our hands, with our advice, actually can be complemented by getting people active, by reassuring them and reactivating, by teaching them that not every hurt equals harm, and that what they've been told is not the whole truth about their scans. So this woman had focal bone edema, is noted of the subchondral bone of the weight-bearing articular surface medially. There's fissuring of the cartilage. This is all scary stuff. She had edema. It's new. It's worse than a prior study, just done a few months before. There's a grade 3 signal noted at the junction of the body and the posterior horn of the medial meniscus associated with a horizontal and a vertical component, which appears to communicate to the superior articular surface compatible with a non-displaced meniscal tear. This is all scary talk. Associated fraying of the free margin. Again, it's progressed. It's getting worse. So this is all negative messages. All nocebos. So we asked her how she felt. If you had to spend the rest of your life with your condition as it is right now, how would you feel? Horrible, 10 out of 10. On a scale of 0 to 10, how certain are you? How confident are you that you'll be doing normal things in the future? 8 out of 10, not certain at all. And these are the questions that are asked in my intake forms. Telehealth or face-to-face. It precedes the history when I actually when I actually communicate with people verbally. How confident are you that you're moving in the right direction? A, not confident at all. How do you feel about activity? Does physical activity make your pain worse? Yes, 7 out of 10, I agree. What activities give you the most trouble and rate it 0 to 10? Walking, 7 out of 10, just walking, 7 out of 10. So this is just a sample, and here she is, Leah.
What's your
this is aftercare.
level of confidence is right now about
and care was only on
your,
telehealth.
Your knee and the path that you're on.
I would say from 1 to 10, if you would say my confidence, I would say it's going to be like 7 3/4 or 7.5.
Yeah.
So I can walk now more.
Great.
And I can stay in my, like you say, putting my, my hand, my leg, I've done this morning the handles.
Great.
I've done this morning to walk like in one line. And I done staying in one leg.
Great. Sobriety walk and balance.
Sobriety walk, yes. And balance. I feel a little bit this left leg, left side. And I didn't put my eyes yet because I just finished, but it's only finished with you. I put my eyes a little bit and I will ice my foot. My knee, left knee, a little bit kind of, I don't feel stiff, but I can see it's a little stiff. I can see that, but I don't feel it.
Great. And overall, I'm just curious, how do you see things in the future? Do you feel confident that it's going to continue to get better and more stable and you'll be able to avoid surgery, or do you feel otherwise?
I really feel that I may be able to avoid surgery.
Great.
I really feel this way. I have a question for you.
So she had pathology, she had effusion, she had visible swelling, and through telehealth alone, we gave her a door handle squat where she holds on the doorknob and squats up and down slowly using tempo. We gave her sobriety walk, which is tandem walking, heel to toe, and we gave her balance training. We told her to walk more in spite of the fact that she was told not to walk. I explained to her that the unanticipated benefit of walking is it would be actually a treatment for her hypertension. Can you believe this, Ryan, that she was told not to walk because she's hypertensive? I mean, this is the opposite of what should be happening. And I want to show another video, and then I want to take a question, and we'll finish things up. I know a lot of you, again, came in at 10 o'clock Pacific Standard Time. This is a patient who had bilateral arm pain. He had weakness in one arm that was very severe. The pain was intractable. He was worried he would need surgery. He has a newborn at home. He's a history professor at UCLA. We've cut down on his visits. He's getting basically one face-to-face via telehealth a month. And then we're guiding by the side. We're doing correspondence via email for debriefing, and then tweaking his program without even seeing him weekly based on the feedback that he's giving us. So we're uncovering lower tier services where we can concierge people and shepherd them at lower cost points. To Ryan's point about group fitness and some of the things I mentioned earlier about exercise libraries and things like that. Here I'm going to show two short videos.
But it's still, and also on top of that, doing it at home with like basically no weights. I mean, I have 4 kettlebells. And so that's another thing where it's like, I was just like, have to go to the gym, have to whatever. And now I realize that if I feel this way, I haven't been in the gym in 3 months. We have a gym in our building, which I can't go to, which is the situation. So that's been, So, and also, it's exciting about kettlebells and stuff to realize this is a more convenient way to do workouts than have to like go somewhere or get in the car or whatever. So
we call the kettlebell the Swiss Army knife of training.
Yeah, I can see why, and I understand that I've built up enough strength that I'm not noticing or forgetting some of the earlier phases of that, but all the stability stuff, obviously. But it's been fun because it's not a tool I ever used in my other weightlifting, and so I really enjoyed that. So
Love it. All right, shall we get started?
Yeah.
So that's my new office, my backyard, and you can see we're hitting all the spots. It's fun, it's novel. He doesn't have to go to his gym. He's not able to go to his gym. He's found a versatile tool. It's novel. It's something different from what he was doing before. And now he'll continue, and you'll see is that whereas he came in with a severe pinched nerve with triceps weakness and nerve compression, he is now so much better that he's pivoting to a lifelong problem he's had in his lower extremity kinetic chain.
Oh, the other observation, I mean, just because it was something I noticed. I mean, you know, thinking about it, you know, I had all the problems. I've had knee problems with soccer. You know, I had the Auschwitz slaughters growing up. And then since college, you know, and this is something I notice now because of now having all that, my hips are firing. I probably never bent my knees to pick anything up for like the last 20 years because I became, you know, it was the fear of my knees from the, I mean, I never had to, I mean, I didn't blow my knee out from Auschwitz ladders, but I was in so much pain for 3 or 4 years that I just taught myself to never bend at the knee, which meant my, you know, I was never firing my hips. And now since I have this mobility, right, like whether I'm picking something up or doing anything, it's like a completely new motion that it just hasn't happened probably since I was like 12, you know? So that was just something, and it's kind of like, that's again, the history piece to it, but it makes sense, like it all kind of, now it's starting to fit together of like, why I just never bent my knees in any capacity, right? So.
Males who have had the Auschwitz slaughters problem will, like any person who handles any stress, will compensate.
Yeah.
And then the compensation becomes a program, becomes you. So we have a great saying, you'll love this as a historian, your biography becomes your biology. And
right,
in your case, your biology, it's reciprocal, became your biology became your biology. The Auschwitz slaughters became your biography, and then your biography then was like a toxin, like a poison, like a virus.
Right. Yeah.
And then you cope, and then out of sight, out of mind, you were still playing soccer.
Right.
And then you wind up with the left arm, gift of injury, and you come in and we're rebooting stuff, and now you're saying, God, I'm walking better than I've ever walked since I'm 12.
That's crazy. That's crazy. Yeah.
But it all goes together.
Yeah. It's just a fear. It was this just intense fear of like blowing my knee out, you know, because they told you all the stories and like, you know, when I was a kid, I probably got diagnosed in the late 80s, right? But like, we'd hear all the stories from my other soccer coaches who were like, they used to put kids' casts in or their knees in casts, right, from Auschwitz ladders, right? And so you just like, and I was like a big soccer player, so it's this like constant fear of like, God, don't blow my knee out. And so even though I was a goalie, but
you know, that's a common story, shockingly,
mm-hmm.
and it will certainly make a person less resilient. It'll make you feel fragile.
Yeah.
And, you know what a placebo is. Now we coined a new term called the nocebo.
Right. Yeah, I've heard of this. Yeah.
It's the thought that you're vulnerable, or the equating hurt with harm, and then you get a structural diagnosis.
Right.
And the labeling has all this baggage with it.
Right. Yeah. That's interesting.
And
anyway,
then you come into the arm, and you were really anxious about the arm. You had the newborn, you're anxious about the arm, you're thinking like surgery, what's gonna happen? It's my spine.
Right.
That was the story. That was what was going on.
Yeah.
So in conclusion, now we've got telehealth, we're not seeing you in the office. We managed to be able to program from a distance, so I'm not even seeing you once a week. We're just doing once a month. This is going well, right?
Yeah, no, I mean, I felt like I kept on top of it, and I was happy with the progress I was making, and I was also happy to check in because this gives me, makes me, I think it's important to check in no matter what. So
great, yeah, the debriefs are crucial, and I want you to debrief with me via email so that I can tune things weekly.
Okay.
And then we'll meet again like this in a month.
Okay.
Great. So I'll send you a new list of everything.
So the bottom line is, you see how what we've been talking about is in all of our practices. It's everywhere. People have been poisoned by these ideas, and they become protective. He was protecting his knee because he was told he might need to be casted, and for his whole life, basically, he's been avoiding bending. And lo and behold, we do what Nick says. We're treating him for a pinched nerve in his neck, and we're doing whole body rehab. So I'm teaching him how to squat, because squatting is the foundational movement. It's the basic, most fundamental building block or basic training element. And as an unanticipated consequence, now on the back end of his rehab, he's telling me, my God, I'm walking in a way I haven't walked since I was 12. That wasn't my goal. So you have this ripple effect that occurs that you can't even anticipate when you're taking care of people in this way, that occurs as a result of the empowerment process. For me, this actually gives me a lot of passion because I see these type of results every day. And when you hear these things that you can't expect, it's exciting. It never stops being exciting. So to summarize what we're accomplishing in the COVID period is we're describing the science. The science is that we become disabled. Disability is on the rise, 54% increase since 1990, and this goes hand in hand with the inactivity crisis. We're becoming less and less active. People are being imaged more and more, and these are nocebos. And so people are now associating hurt with harm. They feel they're victims, and there's nothing they can do short of heroic procedures, heroic interventions to fix the problem. But we can reverse this. We can give people a different message. We can use different words. We can say the body is built to last, it's not built to break. We can explain that the back is one of the strongest structures of the body. We can identify the overprotective language and the source of it from what people were told about their scans or their label, like Osgood Slaughter. And we can identify that they haven't been using their kinetic chain, that they haven't been using their whole body, that overprotection has led them to becoming underprepared. This is not complicated. This is very simple. This can be explained to people. And then at the end of the day, none of this matters. What we need to do is give people a positive experience with me. We need to cause adaptation. We need to create an environment that challenges people at the edge of their capability in relatable ways, in novel ways. So we have to find the hardest thing they do well. When we find the hardest thing that they do well, this is a trigger for adaptation. So we're not against the language. And Ryan, can you read the question that Janet D'Arce asked us?
Yes. How do you balance the patient's desire for a label with using language that doesn't pathologize?
So if they've been told something, it's not that what they were told was wrong. There is structural issues. It's just these things aren't a sentence. They're a description. So it's a description. It's accurate. We're not denying it. But then we share with people that, you know, as you age, more and more people have this, and the correlation of this with symptoms is very poor. And people can have surgery or not surgery, and the results are the same. So Nick's point about it's all about results. You can get the same results. Oh, you mean I don't have to get it fixed? No, you don't. It's an elective procedure. We're finding in the COVID period, elective procedures are not being performed and people aren't getting worse. In fact, people are getting better. So education is the elephant in the room. Education is not simple. And we've been doing a deep dive, thanks to Lorimer Mosley and all of the guests, Matt Lowe and Peter Stillwell and Paula Silva and Nick Winkelman and Rachel Balkovec. Pain education before activity, whether it's on the sporting field or whether it's in the clinic and it's in life, reduces exercise-induced pain amongst people. Explicit education. And we're describing in detail how important our words are and the subtleties of this and how dramatic it can be. One of the things we educate people is about the forecast. People not only want to know, Janet, you know, about why do I have pain and what's the label, can you put a tag on it, but they want to know how long it's going to take. They want to know what's causing my pain, what can you do for me, what should I do, what should I avoid, and how long is it going to take? This is what people want to know. We need to know what people want to know. This is what people want to know. It's shown at the end of Explain Pain in Butler and Mosley's book. It's from a very famous study. That's what people want to know. And we don't want to be disingenuous and take advantage of people because that's what they want to know and tell them a lie. Because they want to know what's causing their pain. If we're uncertain, we don't want to say we found the cause of their pain. That's the easy way. That's the way of orthopedists. That's the way of many physical therapists and chiropractors. Oh, I found the cause. You have a pelvic torsion. No, we want to be honest. We can give them descriptions, we can give them hypotheses, we can tell them this is part of it, but it's complex. And then we want to pivot towards something that gives them hope, distinguishing structure from function, software from hardware, explaining where we should make the intervention. Where's the weakest link we can make an intervention where we can make an impact? And if we focus on function, the blue line, that makes an impact on symptoms. Dr. Levitt said he who treats the site of symptoms is lost. We don't want to just chase the pain. We want to get to the source of the source. We want to get upstream. And so it does take time. We don't know how long. Tendinopathies can be 5, 6, 7 months. But if you improve function, that improves resilience, and that reduces sensitivity. And then a person becomes less protective, and then they become better prepared. And then lo and behold, somewhere down the road, the hurt that they feel is no longer a ball and chain. It doesn't hold them hostage anymore. As they start to function better, even before the symptoms are declining, they're not a victim anymore. Laird Hamilton said, that which enhances performance prevents injury, and that which enhances function makes a person feel less fragile, eventually reduces their symptoms. So not all hurt equals harm. It's a scale, it's a spectrum, it's traffic light. Yellow, look both ways before you cross. So it is in each of our hands to create a better world for all the people who live in it. It is in each of our spheres, our environments, our populations that we serve, to create the right environment, to use the best language, to learn what's important to those people, to speak their language. This is the power that we have. And I so miss our times together, our lab immersion experiences. I can't wait. I get chills down my spine right now thinking about when we're all going to be together again, learning from each other. Like Nick said, when you write a book, you learn, but he's so free right now because he's not writing a book, and I'm free. I finished Rehab of the Spine, 3rd edition, and now I'm really, my mind is creating connections now between different things because I'm at ease now. I don't have that deadline pressure, but I so miss being able to work with my faculty like Ryan. Here's Joseph Chen in Shanghai, who is with me for many years at LASS and has moved to China and has translated and assisted me overseas. I so miss being with you, Ryan. I can't wait to meet you, Aaron. Aaron and I are like brothers now, sharing baseball stories, and we've never met. But I feel I know you, man. And Geronimo Bejarano is so active online, calling people to task as just a youngster in the field, but he's so well read and so learned. But there's something for being together, and I appreciate everybody. I appreciate all of you, and hope to meet you and to train you and to train with you and to watch you challenge yourselves through our environments we create in the lab immersions. But we are going to hit the ground running. We are going to hit the ground running like never before. We don't do 20 hours, 21 hours of work describing the science in all of our 6 or 7 courses combined. We have over 100 hours of lab immersion experience. And at most, we do like 1.5 hours of didactic material. So you're better prepared than any group has ever been before. But these are the types of labs that we do, of movement explorations we do. We have fun, we learn new things. Everybody is in a state of honesty and humility. It's a culture where we have a level playing field, and everybody's ideas are welcomed. So I just so miss it. I realize now, just showing these slides to you, how much I miss the gift I have of being able to be with you in close contact and to be able to meet people of different cultures who speak different languages from all over the world. It's my blessing. It's something that I'm forever grateful for the opportunity. And I think for all of us, this pandemic has allowed us to see that our manual therapy and our corrective exercises are people's own expectations of what they need, can be companions of another way of thinking, that there are other possibilities, that the way we've done things before wasn't exactly perfect. And if we put compassion first, if we develop a compassion to serve that is greater than our compulsion to survive, and I know many of us are hurting right now because financially it's hard to pay our bills, but if we can put our compassion to serve above our compulsion to survive, something unexpected could happen. There's an alchemy in COVID-19 that we're going to go back changed. We're going to have adapted, and we're going to have developed a community. And I know I'll see a number of you in June on Sunday. I think it's the 14th. We'll have a deep dive on how to profile our athletes and our patients. Ryan, you have any thoughts to take us out here after this 10-week journey?
Oh man, it's definitely been a bright spot in all this. And yeah, I guess I didn't realize how much I missed being at these lab immersions until seeing those pictures either. But I'm excited to, I'm seeing a lot of the messages over here, and people, I think we should all continue to keep this momentum going. I think we need to all stay in touch, communicate, whether it's through Facebook messages or emails or through the groups. And yeah, if any of you all want to learn more and join us, feel free to reach out. But also, you know, this webinar series hopefully shown people that we can go into a deep dive and give real justice to what we're teaching from a profiling, the profiling course, and really join us for a deep dive into that, because we hear a lot of times about, okay, you know, what you're teaching is great. Now teach us the nuts and bolts of it. How do we use motivational interviewing? How do we use, how do we find the weak point, and then how do we address it and attack it? And I know myself and Dr. Liebenson, we really enjoy teaching those details that this series is only teed up, and there's so much more to go into. So hopefully we can all stay in touch, and I'm glad that we had this opportunity. So thank you all for tuning in all these weeks.
Aaron, I got to thank you and Geronimo. If you hadn't on a Saturday night said to me, hey, Craig, why don't you do a Zoom webinar tomorrow morning at 9 a.m? No notes prepared, no idea what it would be like, never using Zoom before. It's been an honor for me to have you and Geronimo by my side as a safety net, and also just a fuel. I feel like it's all about the next gen. And we're going to have a C-gen in the future. The COVID generation of the future, they're going to be the ones who hold us to the fire and not let us fully go back into these broken ways of the past. The change that we thought from a realistic standpoint were unachievable. I think all bets are off now. The vested interest and the status quo biases, it's like Sammy Sosa with a baseball bat. We're breaking it like a twig right now, Aaron. And I can't thank you enough. I can't thank Geronimo enough. So I'm going to let you have the final words here. Give us your spin on what we have to be hopeful about.
Yeah, I think just for me personally, I owe you and Ryan a huge thank you, because it's just been an honor of a lifetime to be involved with something like this. And all of the work that's gone into it has truly just been a privilege. So I can't thank you guys enough. And I mean, all of this work, all the guest speakers, everybody with their kind of intertwining messages, all deeply steeped in principles. I think it just sort of gets this huge momentum built, and it just shows that the work is never truly done. And like for me, I feel like I'm just getting started, and you and Ryan are obviously both well into your careers. So it just shows that I'm embarking on what's going to be a long and hopefully very fruitful journey. So I'm just really excited to have you guys help me kick that off and kind of keep carrying the torch and see how many people we can impact along the way and who we can help.
I love it. I love it. I feel like I'm just beginning too, Aaron. So to Nick's point about humility and uncertainty, the world is getting a restart. This is a reboot. What a exciting opportunity to have a do-over. We're having a do-over. So it's a global world. We're all in this together, and we have incredible science, and we have incredible heart, and just to have an unprecedented opportunity for a do-over, let's not let that go to waste. Thank all of you for attending from all over the world, and look forward to staying in touch with you. Ryan will make sure that the community stays nice and tight. Right, Ryan?
You got it.
All right. So long, everybody. Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Thanks, guys.